Hey, gang. Recently, an individual named Ross Scott would come up with a petition for the EU that would try and stop scummy business practices in the games industry. While it's clear he's very passionate about protecting games and trying to protect consumers, this would lead to mixed responses from people on the internet, despite his heart being in the right place. Pirate Software would make a very long video against the initiative from the perspective of someone in the industry. I've had some time to think on it and boil down my thoughts on the subject. And this is important to me because I'm pretty passionate about making sure that players are taken care of and not getting taken advantage of for anything they buy. It's just awful. And as someone that's worked in games for over 15 years, I wanted to give my thoughts and perspectives to contribute to the conversation so that we can have some better understanding of how games are being built when we make these requests for how we want things to be in the future. I can totally see with the game cited in the petition, The Crew, where you had it purchased, it has a single player campaign, and then because Ubisoft decided to just say, fuck you, it's totally disabled. That kind of anti-consumer behavior is bad. It's not excusable. And if it were a license issue, it should have been abundantly clear that that license existed for a certain amount of time so that players were given a clear expectation that this game is going to only last for so long and that they were buying an experience and not a permanent game. And I do want to say to start out, if this initiative passes as it were written, it's not going to be retroactive. Those protections will get added into the bill when it's finalized. It's also not going to be done for years. So any scummy business practices that you're seeing now and in the next couple of years, they're still going to be an issue in the EU for years. That's just how these laws are going to get written. And another point, because this bill is very vague, that adds an avenue for them to request people that are experts in the field to come in and help clarify a lot of the sections. And all that's going to do is water down any of the consumer protections that you're hoping to get for. Because when you put forth something that's vague, as it gets filled out, the people that are filling it out are going to be lawyers and lobbyists. So unless you are making it extremely clear from the get-go, you're not going to get the result that you're asking for. And this is the case with pretty much any lawmakers, because that's just how that industry is. The industry of lawmaking is just a bunch of lobbying and special interest groups throwing their money around. Now, I do think this is a really important start to a conversation. So let's start out with the state of the industry right now. So we have three major types of games over time. First off, you got your traditional games. You buy it, you have full access forever. This is like card games, board games, most physical video games. You buy the cartridge or the disc and you can play it whenever you want. And it may or may not have multiplayer content of some kind, whether it be local co-op or whether it be some kind of hosting on a machine so that people connect to you directly. Next, we get your pay-to-play games. These are MMOs with subscription models where you have to pay a monthly fee in order to have access to the game. Arcade games, where every time you want to play, you need to pay money. And casino games, which are casino games. They're gambling. You have to put money in to play the games. Finally, our most disliked and newest, well, it has mixed results, live service games. Traditionally, MMOs would also fall into this because they were constantly being updated. They constantly had events in them. They may be free to play these days. It's possibly multiplayer-based games like MOBAs or Battle Royale. Back in college, I used to play a game called Gunbound. That was a live service game. Almost all mobile games, Facebook games, and like gacha games, which is one of the most popular categories of games right now. Well, profitable categories of games. So Genshin Impact alone made almost $950 million in 2023. That particular game, as of recording, is undergoing a boycott where the people that are boycotting the game are still playing the game. It's ridiculous. And like it or not, a lot of major studios are run very, very poorly. And when you run a game studio really poorly, you need a lot of money to keep your particular shit show going. This is why you see an in-game store in WoW Classic, or Bethesda pushing out a store for people to sell mods to their games, because they need a cut of that for them to run their terrible business model. But shitty business aside, I want to talk about the infrastructure that most modern games have as it pertains to multiplayer. I think it's important for you guys as consumers to understand how these systems are built and why they are built that way, so that we can have all the facts together when we have these conversations. Because from the few videos I've seen on the subject, we've had people just say, well, if the game turns off, why don't you just give the players the server binary? And while that's easy for a game like Minecraft, where you can get a Docker image of a Minecraft server, put in your values, and just have a multiplayer server for Minecraft, modern games that are larger are far more complex. So to start out, old servers used to just be the server. It was just this monolith. It did everything. But over time, we would try and minimize the amount of responsibilities that each server would have, and have them be very clear servers that did certain things. Nowadays, we have microservice architectures where we break apart those responsibilities into small sections. They run on their own servers and compartmentalize the responsibilities and define how those microservices communicate to each other and what they can communicate to. For an example, login servers. Have you ever joined a game, been stuck in a queue, and then eventually you get like an error code when you're in the queue? That is because their login server, it's probably not load tested so that it can handle a certain amount of users for so long, and it had some kind of error that kicked you out of the queue. That's a microservice. Another idea would be like a matchmaking service, where you would talk to the matchmaking server to say, I need to get into a match. This is my information. Because the matchmaking server can query your account server, which has your info, it has your MMR, it knows where you need to be placed in terms of your skill level to get into a match with similar skilled players. This is really important in a modern era, because cybersecurity is something that is paramount to most modern games. We want, when we make games, to make it so that bad actors can't come in and either ruin the experience or access the code, access databases, particularly bad. So when we break these things apart, we add layers for bad actors to actually cause lasting harm to the player. And it also makes it so that if a bad actor gets access to the credentials to like a developer or compromises their machine, if that developer only has access to some services, well, that's an issue because those services are compromised. But the other services are not, because that person only has compartmentalized responsibilities on what they're supposed to be working on. Cyber security threats are getting more and more complex over time. And we need to, as software developers in general, make sure that we're following the best security practices and making sure that we put all these gates in position so that our customers can be protected. Because one of the worst things that could happen is if a bad actor got access to a database, especially if that database had access to like payment information. Even if it's encrypted, you're still going to have, one of those letters come in where it's like, hey, sorry, we leaked your personal data, your address, payment info. It's all super, super bad. So all of these things are things that we are doing as engineers and architects to make sure that we're able to protect our consumers, protect their data, and protect the games or products, whatever we're making, from bad actors that want to, dick over a bunch of people for money, because that's usually what it is, right? When you say, oh, just give them the binary, there's no just the binary. There's a lot of different systems for a lot of these more modern games, and you're not going to be able to get a binary for everything. It's just not realistic. And to say, oh, well, you should do this instead, you're introducing security issues, and that is not a reasonable request when you are having a conversation to say, oh, well, just don't provide the proper security for these games. Because later down the line we want to be able to run it solo. That's unreasonable. With that said, people have been able to reverse engineer these servers so that you can run your own servers. A great example is WoW Classic. Before it came out, you had people that took the original World of Warcraft, they built their own servers, and they had clients talking to those servers. We have people, like we have the smartest people in the world here in America, and we have the ability to do this if we just put our minds to it. We don't have to build something that is there to serve multiple products. You can have people come in and say, okay, what is actually being done? Sure, let's write a server. We'll have this game run with whatever it needs. That's all doable. And for those of you watching from outside the US, don't worry about it. Another issue that's really worth talking about is owning versus licensing a game. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons between digital licensing and physical media. So with physical copies, you can almost always play the game. I say almost always because of reasons. And you can sell or loan the game to other people. Now, the cons are that physical media can be damaged. It can be stolen. It can be lost in something like a fire or a flood. Discs and cartridges, they degrade over time, though they do last for decades. Like a Switch cartridge is supposed to last for like at least 20 years. And the hardware may break or need repairs over time. It will not last forever. You can keep repairing things, but eventually those parts, they're not going to be in production anymore. And the used market for them, eventually you're going to have the worst quality parts and you're not going to be able to repair your machines. And making physical media is expensive. If you require physical media for every game developer, you're going to lock out a lot of small indie studios from the market because they can't afford to print a bunch of discs or cartridges to get their game out to the public. And for licensing, you can download the copy of your game to whatever machine that you're playing on. You can link your accounts with a specific storefront so that you have access to the things that you buy. You get very deep discounts on places like Steam. And it allows small developers to enter the market. However, if the store gets shut down, you lose everything. All console-based stores are basically designed to only exist for 20 to 30 years because that console has a life cycle. The moment a console stops being produced, that store will inevitably be shut down in the near-ish future. Though the PS3 is still hanging on, I'm kind of surprised because that left it production in like 2016, 2017, and you can still use the store, which is kind of shocking. So with those pros and cons out of the way, let's shift gears and talk about some broad goals that we should aim for here in America. So first off, game preservation. We should add protections so that players can maintain dead games without fear of litigation. End-of-life consumer protections. That would be basically refund windows so that if you buy the game or you get microtransactions within a certain period of time before the end of life comes, you should be able to get those products refunded, those purchases. That's fair. Protections for hosting servers of old games. This would apply to games where official servers are no longer supported for those games. And we should also add protections so that if that game decides to open official servers back up, they can't use that as an excuse to then invalidate the protections of people that had been operating in good faith to run servers for those games. Also, a clear legal framework for developers of hardware emulators and a setup for legally distributing ROMs for older games. What would constitute an older game is a matter for debate, but I think that is a conversation that's worth having so that we can have those protections for people so that we can keep older games alive and distribute them without fear of having some company saying, oh, we decided to acquire this license. It's time to send cease and desists and legal letters out to anyone that is even hosting our stuff. Another thing that I'd like to see is protections for tournament runners so that they can run tournaments without having some company come in and tear them down. Even if they're just licensing a game, I don't see any reason that a company should be able to shut down events that are run by their fans. I think it is beyond absurd. Um, Next up, ownership versus licensing clarity. I think when you are making a purchase, it shouldn't, like, it's buy everywhere, even on Steam. If you're getting a license, it should say, hey, very clearly right here, purchase license, or replace buy with license. Whatever we want to do, that's a conversation on what that can look like. And have any games that you own or license not have it so that they can shut off single player aspects to the game remotely. I know some people think that's a big, oh, that's not possible, but realistically, your game should be able, if it has a single player mode, it needs to be able to function without talking to the internet. From a testing perspective, if I have a dev environment that's down because someone's working on something, and then I can't suddenly test my local stuff in a game, that's pretty awful. So there needs to be things so that you can continue testing. So even adding that in to say, hey, you need to have this as a possibility, it's better for the developers to have that in mind and put those designs into the game so that it can function for their testers. It's just a good practice. There are some people that are just shitty developers, and then they have their always online system, and that's shit. There's no way around it. It sucks. And I think a lot of people love the idea of owning games, and I agree in a lot of ways, but I'm a huge user of Steam. I have like over 800 games that I own there, even though I don't actually own them. But because Steam is such an amazing service, I don't have any concerns about using Steam. Steam knows exactly the kind of games that I like to play, recommends them for me. It gets me to play games that I wouldn't have normally purchased or played because it has a great recommendation system. I've bought a number of games on GOG as well. It's also a really good service. And the same can't be said for all platforms. I never bought anything from Origin, EA's old launcher, and I will not be buying anything from the new EA app. I do not trust them at all with anything, ever. And I would also like to remind everyone that when we're having these conversations, we are having these conversations as well with people that are looking at games as just another form of entertainment. And the cost of entertainment is you get the best value from games. So I recently saw Deadpool and Wolverine in the theater. It was like $20, 2-hour movie. So it's like $10 per hour of entertainment. But in terms of Vampire Survivors, for example, like it was like $5. Yeah, for those $5, I've gotten like 33 hours out of the game. It's like 15 cents per hour of entertainment. So if you have a game that you've played for years and it goes off the market, or you can't play it or anything anymore, or the experience ends, I don't think it's a hard sell for asking for legislators or regulatory bodies to say, I need my money back, because you have gotten so much value out of that product by that point compared to other entertainment that you could get. It's unreasonable to make an expectation that those people need to return money to you. Especially if they are eventually told they need to make it clear that they're providing an experience. Once they make that clear, I don't think there's a great argument to be had to say you need to give this money back to me for purchasing the game. As long as you have your refund windows in there for an end of life, I think that's good enough, personally. Now, of everything that we talk about and any of these conversations you see anywhere, keep in mind that we shouldn't expect anything anytime soon. The average age of a member of Congress is like 58, and it's like 64 for our senators. And those folks don't know anything about games. But as time passes, we will have more people enter Congress that understand games, that understand the consumer issues that we're facing. And they are going to be more open to helping write legislation or help pass legislation. They don't write jack shit, let's be serious. So, but help getting that legislation passed so that we can get these protections written into law, or whatever, or grant the Consumer Protection Agency some kind of authority over it, whatever it may be, So we're in no rush to figure out these answers right away. It's just something that I think it's good for us to talk about, have in our mind, have a serious conversation about it. Because right now, we need to get everyone kind of on the same page as to what we want to get over time. And it's something that consumers and developers should be on the same page of, so that there's not this big conflict between the two. And I know that there's like a snowball's chance in hell that Activision Blizzard corporate would be willing to pass any kind of laws that would make it so that they couldn't do shitty business practices. But the same can't be said for the union that is representing all the workers at that company. If we can identify more narrow and clear protections that we all collectively think are good for game preservation and consumer protection, that's great. That is a framework that we should talk about, figure out, get people involved so that we can be very clear with what we're looking for to help protect consumers in the future, so that we can get this either put into law, consumer protections, or get companies to agree to terms to say, hey, we don't want to be regulated, so we are going to opt in and do this thing. I would also like you guys to keep in mind, if the Stop Killing Games Act is written, would be passed in the EU, that would basically kill live service games in the EU. And for some people, they're like, oh, that's great. I hate those games. And I get if you hate live service games or gotcha games or loot boxes or whatever. But Shift Up, they made a lot of good money based on Nikkei. And then they came out and they followed it up with Stellar Blade. That is a great proof of concept for other companies that are getting these cash cows out, to say you can get a cash cow out and start working on more passionate, good games that people would be interested in playing. I hope more companies follow suit with that. And if they do gotcha or whatever kind of games that they are putting out and they make a ton of money, that they use that money to build cool games. Maybe not that are just there to milk people for all the money they're worth, but that are there to be awesome, be the kind of games that they want to build. And I would also point out that I don't have the right to tell you or anyone what games that they can and can't play. And the reverse also applies. So just because some people don't like certain games doesn't mean that those games should be banned. I say let the free market decide what should exist. If it's cash grab, let it fail. And if that cash grab succeeds, then enough idiots are willing to pay money for it. And I would remind you that a fool and their money are soon parted. And if it wasn't done with throwing their money away on games, it would just be something else. I don't want games to be banned anywhere. The most that I can get behind is not allowing kids to be playing gotcha games or games with loot boxes, because foundationally those games are set up to act in the same way as gambling does. And I don't think that's good for kids. If you're an adult, gamble away. Seek help if it becomes a problem. I also could see some kind of benefit to self-exclusion setups for gotcha games. For those of you that are unfamiliar, it is a mechanism that casinos use to help people with gambling problems. It's you self-enroll to a self-exclusion program where they do not allow you to gamble at a casino. And what you can do is then enroll yourself in some kind of addiction treatment so that you're not throwing all your money away. You can't be forced into those agreements. You have to voluntarily say you want to do it. I think that could be perfectly fine for some companies to do. I don't know if they should be compelled to do it, but I think that's something that's worth having in your mind as something that could be helpful or that we could talk about. But I've rambled for too long. If you made it this far, I super appreciate you giving me your time. Feel free to subscribe for future games related content, and I hope to see you in a future video. Farewell.